Imagine a man standing at the edge of history, facing an impossible question. Could a single leader persuade millions of people to abandon fear, overcome division, and fight for a nation that did not yet exist? In the summer of 1947, the world watched as a new country appeared on the map. Its name was Pakistan. But behind that extraordinary moment was a decades-long struggle, shaped by political battles, personal sacrifices, and the determination of one remarkable man, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Long before he became known as Quaid-e-Azam, meaning great leader, Jinnah was simply a young man with extraordinary ambition. Born on December 25, 1876, in Karachi, he grew up in a changing British India, where communities of different religions, cultures, and traditions lived side by side. As a young man, he traveled to London to study law, entering a world far removed from the streets of his homeland. There, he developed the discipline, confidence, and sharp legal mind that would later define his political career. When Jinnah returned to India, he entered politics at a time when the future of the subcontinent was becoming increasingly uncertain. At first, he believed that Hindus and Muslims could work together within a united India. He was known for his constitutional approach, his belief in negotiation, and his refusal to surrender easily to political pressure. But as the decades passed, the relationship between India's major communities became increasingly tense. Jinnah gradually came to believe that the political safeguards he considered essential for India's Muslims could not be guaranteed within a united nation. His vision began to change. The lawyer who once argued for cooperation would eventually become the most powerful voice behind the demand for a separate homeland. But creating a country from an idea was not simply a matter of drawing lines on a map. It meant confronting one of the greatest political challenges of the 20th century. Jinnah would have to negotiate with the British Empire, challenge the Indian National Congress, convince millions of Muslims to support his vision, and withstand enormous pressure from every direction. And yet, at the beginning of this journey, there was no certainty that Pakistan would ever exist. There was only an idea, and one man determined to turn that idea into reality. By the 1930s, the political landscape of British India had changed dramatically. The dream of a united India was becoming harder to defend, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah found himself at the center of an increasingly bitter struggle over the future of millions of Muslims. He had returned to active politics with a renewed determination, taking leadership of the All India Muslim League and transforming it into a powerful political force. Jinnah's challenge was enormous. He had to convince Muslims across a vast and diverse subcontinent that their political future required a new direction, while facing the growing influence of the Indian National Congress. For Jinnah, the issue was not simply religion. It was about political representation, security, and the rights of a community that feared becoming permanently dominated by a larger majority. He argued that Muslims were not merely a minority within India, but a distinct nation with their own history, culture, traditions, and political interests. His position became increasingly influential as negotiations between political leaders repeatedly failed to produce an agreement acceptable to both sides. Then, in 1940, came a moment that would change the course of history. At a massive gathering in Lahore, the Muslim League formally adopted a resolution calling for independent states in the Muslim-majority regions of the subcontinent. The Lahore Resolution did not immediately provide a detailed blueprint for a new country, but it represented a dramatic turning point. The idea of a separate homeland had moved from political debate into a powerful mass movement. Jinnah now stood before a challenge unlike anything he had faced before. He had to unite Muslims who spoke different languages, lived in different provinces, and belonged to different cultural traditions. From Bengal in the east to the Punjab in the west, from the cities to the villages, the movement needed a common political voice. Jinnah became that voice. With his precise speeches, disciplined leadership, and unwavering political strategy, he transformed the Muslim League into the central force behind the demand for Pakistan. But the road ahead was filled with obstacles. The British government was struggling to maintain control over India, while Congress leaders opposed the idea of partition. The Second World War had weakened Britain's power, and the question of India's independence could no longer be postponed. As the war ended, the pressure for independence reached a breaking point. The British wanted to leave. Congress wanted a united India. And Jinnah insisted that any settlement must recognize the political aspirations of India's Muslims. The battle for Pakistan had entered its final and most dangerous stage. The year 1947 began with the end of an empire drawing closer, but for the people of British India, freedom came with a terrifying uncertainty. After years of political deadlock, Britain finally accepted that its rule over the subcontinent could not continue indefinitely. The question was no longer whether independence would come, but what kind of nations would emerge from the collapse of British rule. For Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the answer was clear. Pakistan had to become a reality. Negotiations entered their final and most intense phase. Jinnah faced powerful opponents, complicated political demands, and an enormous humanitarian challenge. The British government appointed Lord Louis Mountbatten as the last Viceroy of India, giving him the responsibility of overseeing the transfer of power. Mountbatten met with Jinnah and other major political leaders, searching for a solution that could prevent the subcontinent from descending into complete chaos. But compromise was becoming increasingly difficult. The demand for Pakistan had gained enormous support among Muslims, while the Congress leadership remained deeply opposed to the partition of India. Eventually, the decision was made to divide British India into two independent dominions, India and Pakistan. Then came the moment Jinnah had spent years fighting to achieve. On August 14, 1947, Pakistan emerged as a new nation. In Karachi, Muhammad Ali Jinnah stood before the newly formed Constituent Assembly and took on the responsibility of becoming the country's first Governor-General. The man who had once been a young lawyer in London was now leading a nation born in one of the most dramatic political transformations in modern history. But independence was not the peaceful beginning many had imagined. The partition triggered one of the largest migrations in human history. Millions of Muslims, Hindus, and Sikhs were forced to leave their ancestral homes and travel across newly created borders. Trains carried frightened families through an increasingly violent landscape. Entire communities were uprooted. Homes were abandoned, possessions were lost, and countless lives were shattered. Jinnah now faced a challenge even greater than winning independence, building a functioning country from almost nothing. Pakistan needed a government, an economy, armed forces, administrative institutions, and a national identity. Refugees needed shelter and food. Cities needed to absorb enormous populations. The new state was struggling to survive while facing disputes over territory and resources. Despite his declining health, Jinnah continued working with extraordinary determination. He traveled, addressed officials, met refugees, and tried to establish the foundations of the new nation. His famous vision was not simply about creating a country for Muslims. He spoke of equality, justice, and religious freedom, insisting that citizens should be free to worship according to their own beliefs. Pakistan had been created, but its greatest test had only just begun. The creation of Pakistan had been the greatest political victory of Muhammad Ali Jinnah's life, but the price of that victory was immense. The new nation was born with limited resources, millions of refugees in desperate need, and a government that had to be built almost from the ground up. Jinnah understood that winning independence was only the first chapter. The real challenge was to ensure that Pakistan could survive. As the country's first Governor-General, Jinnah worked relentlessly to establish the foundations of the new state. Government departments had to be organized. Civil servants had to be appointed. The armed forces had to be divided between the two new countries. Financial resources, official records, and administrative institutions had to be distributed. At the same time, Pakistan faced serious disputes over territory and resources, while millions of displaced people were searching for a new place to call home. Through all of this, Jinnah's health was quietly deteriorating. He had been suffering from tuberculosis for years, a condition that he kept largely hidden from the public and even from many of his political colleagues. He knew that his time might be limited, but he continued to work with extraordinary intensity. His body was becoming weaker, yet his determination remained strong. In public appearances, Jinnah often looked composed and dignified. Behind that calm image, however, was a man carrying an enormous burden. He had to guide a fragile country through its earliest days while trying to establish a political system based on law, discipline, and national unity. Jinnah repeatedly emphasized the importance of equality before the law. He wanted citizens to feel that their religion should not determine their rights as members of the new state. In his vision, Pakistan would be a country where people could live with dignity and freedom, protected by the law rather than divided by hatred. But history was moving faster than his health could endure. By 1948, Jinnah's condition had become increasingly serious. Doctors advised him to rest, but the responsibilities of the new nation continued to demand his attention. Eventually, he traveled to Ziyarat in Balochistan, hoping that the quiet mountain climate would help him recover. Surrounded by the peaceful landscape, he spent some of his final days away from the political noise of Karachi. Yet the nation he had created still needed him. In September 1948, Jinnah was brought back toward Karachi in a specially arranged journey. His health had deteriorated dramatically. On September 11, 1948, less than 13 months after Pakistan's independence, Muhammad Ali Jinnah died. He was 71 years old. For millions of Pakistanis, the news was devastating. The man who had led them through decades of political struggle was gone. But the country he had fought to create remained. Jinnah's life had ended, but his legacy had only begun to unfold. The question now was whether the nation he had created could live up to the ideals he had spent his final years defending. The answer would depend on generations yet to come. Muhammad Ali Jinnah was gone, but the story of Pakistan had only entered its next chapter. The country he had fought to create now faced the enormous responsibility of carrying forward the ideals that had inspired its birth. Jinnah had not left behind a perfect nation. He had left behind a young and fragile state, surrounded by challenges that would test its leaders for generations. Yet his greatest contribution was not simply the creation of a new country. It was the belief that determined leadership, political discipline, and a clear vision could transform an impossible dream into reality. Jinnah's journey had been extraordinary. He had begun his career as a young lawyer in colonial India, believing that political problems could be solved through constitutional methods and negotiation. Over time, changing circumstances transformed his political thinking. He became the central figure of the Pakistan movement, bringing together millions of Muslims under a single political cause. Through decades of struggle, he faced powerful opposition, political disagreements, and enormous personal pressure. Yet he rarely abandoned his belief in the power of organization and constitutional politics. His greatest achievement came in 1947, when Pakistan emerged as an independent nation. But the deeper meaning of his legacy remains a subject of discussion and interpretation. To millions, Jinnah represents the determination of a people who believed they needed a homeland where they could shape their own political future. To historians, his life offers a complex story of political transformation, negotiation, leadership, and the consequences of partition. What makes Jinnah's story so compelling is the extraordinary scale of the challenge he faced. He did not command a conventional army that conquered territory. He did not inherit a powerful state. He relied primarily on political strategy, public support, negotiation, and an unwavering determination to achieve his objective. His greatest weapon was his ability to remain focused when the future seemed uncertain. Today, his name remains deeply connected with Pakistan's national identity. His speeches, photographs, and words continue to be studied by generations who were born long after his death. His mausoleum in Karachi has become one of the country's most important landmarks, visited by citizens who come to remember the man known as Quaid-e-Azam. But perhaps the most important part of Jinnah's legacy is the question he leaves behind. What happens to a nation after its founder is gone? A country can be created by one generation, but its future must be protected by every generation that follows. The ideals of equality, justice, freedom, and constitutional rule cannot survive through monuments alone. They require citizens and leaders willing to defend them through their actions. Muhammad Ali Jinnah's life was ultimately a story about the power of an idea. An idea that began as a political demand became a movement, and that movement became a nation. One man did not create Pakistan alone. Millions believed in the dream, sacrificed for it, and carried it forward. But Jinnah became the leader who gave that dream a voice, a direction, and ultimately, a place on the map of the world. His story is not simply the story of how Pakistan was created. It is the story of how history can be changed when courage meets conviction, when leadership meets sacrifice, and when an impossible dream refuses to disappear. And perhaps that is why, decades after his death, the story of Muhammad Ali Jinnah continues to matter, not only to Pakistan, but to anyone who believes that the course of history can still be changed by the choices of one determined human being.